I want to start us out with a question today. And I'm going to let you talk to your elbow buddy, the person who's sitting next to you, if you want to, after each one of these. So let me ask you this. Who would you call if you had a flat tire? If you're out driving around and bang, you've got to pull over. Who are you going to call? Now, let me ask you another one. Who are you going to call if you need a recommendation for like a restaurant or a cafe or a cool spot to go? Tell your elbow buddy. And now let me ask you this. Let's say you have an extra ticket, a bonus ticket to a concert or a sporting event or something really cool. Who are you going to call? Now I'm going to ask you something else. Actually, it's the same question, but it might feel a little bit different. Who are you going to call if you lose your job? Who are you going to call if you're being kicked out of your home? Who are you going to call if there is some bad news about your health? The question that I'm trying to ask with these last three is this. In the hour of your greatest need, who are you going to call? The reality for all of us is that we have higher expectations of some people. The people who you would call for those last questions, you have higher expectations of those people than you might for the people who you would have called for those first three scenarios. These are the people who you trust with the most delicate and vulnerable parts of yourself. And because those are the people who you trust the most, they are the people who could potentially inflict the most damage. When the people that we trust most don't come through for us, if they don't show up, if they ignore us or betray us, well, that hurt, it goes so much deeper than if it was just somebody who we kind of knew. We are in a season called Lent. And while Lent is, of course, the period of time that leads us towards Easter, what we do during Lent isn't just preparation for a celebration. It's a time of year that we give each other a little bit of grace, a little bit of permission to lean in to those things that are really difficult, those things that we don't really want to talk about. This is a season where we get to identify with Jesus not just as a Messiah or a Savior, but actually as somebody who was also completely human and who went through incredibly human experiences. And so as we walk through this season of Lent, our Sunday teachings are going to invite you. They're going to invite you to witness the things that Jesus suffered through. Today I want to talk about the dynamics of friendship. And I know that suffering and friendship don't necessarily go hand in hand, and so this might be a little bit different than some of the sermons that we usually do here at the Well. But I hope that you'll stick with me as I tell you a story pulled from a few different places in the gospel about a person who I think may have been Jesus' very best friend. Peter did not begin his life expecting to change the world. He didn't even expect to be called Peter. You see, he was a fisherman, known by the name Simon, and he worked long nights on the Sea of Galilee. His hands were rough from nets and ropes. His life was shaped by the tides and weather. And then, one ordinary day, everything changed. While Simon was washing his nets after a long, fruitless night of fishing, Jesus stepped into his boat. And after teaching the crowds, Jesus told Simon to put the nets back into deep water. Tired and skeptical, Simon obeyed. And the nets filled so full that they began to break. Overwhelmed, Simon fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." But Jesus replied, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." Simon left his nets, his boats, and his old life behind. Jesus not only stepped into Peter's boat, he stepped into his life. He shared meals in his home and laughed with him on dusty roads, trusted him with questions and confessions that no one else dared voice. Peter was always near Jesus, asking, arguing, believing, misunderstanding, and trying again. When Jesus needed someone to speak up, Peter did. When Jesus wanted to know what the disciples were thinking, Peter said it out loud. Jesus and Peter shared life side by side. Peter even got to witness moments that few others saw. He stood on the mountain during the transfiguration and saw Jesus' glory revealed. He vowed to Jesus fierce loyalty, insisting that he would never, ever abandon his Lord and his friend. Isn't this a beautiful story of friendship? Can't you just imagine that Peter and Jesus knew all kinds of things about each other? I feel like they would have known if one of them slept on their back or their side. I guarantee they would have known what each other's favorite foods were, and I just have to believe, after spending this kind of time together, that they would have also known what the other was thinking by just a tilt of the head or a lift of the eyebrows. I think this is the kind of friendship that we all long for. But this friendship, it didn't always sail on easy tides. No. This friendship hit some really, really difficult times. Jesus tried to be open and honest with his friend, Peter, about how his life was going to end. They were already on the path to Jerusalem. And so Peter's broken-hearted cry at hearing that Jesus was going to be gone was, "I don't like this plan. I don't want you to die. You can't die." Jesus must have felt equally heartbroken in that moment because his friend just didn't understand. But Jesus isn't just misunderstood by Peter. He's also betrayed by him. Not once or twice, but 3 times. 3 times, Peter betrayed his best friend. And after that third insistence that he didn't even know Jesus, Jesus and Peter locked eyes across a courtyard. And the look that Jesus gave to Peter wasn't one of a stranger who was betrayed. It was the look from a friend. A friend who was in deep pain. The deep pain of seeing someone who they trusted pull away from them right at the moment when they needed them most. Peter had promised to die with Jesus. And instead, he pretended he didn't even know him. But the difficulty in this friendship didn't stop here either. Because Jesus wasn't just misunderstood and betrayed by Peter, he was also abandoned by him. After that look in the courtyard, Peter broke. He ran weeping out into the night because he had failed. He had wounded his very closest friend. Do you know that Peter didn't show up for Jesus' trial? He certainly didn't speak up for him. Do you know that Peter wasn't even at the crucifixion? He didn't make it to the cross. He didn't witness the death of his friend. He didn't get to witness it because he was in hiding, stewing in his guilt and in his shame. All of these things, misunderstanding, betrayal, and abandonment, are part of this story of Peter and Jesus' friendship. Can you imagine that kind of wound? Can you imagine that kind of hurt and harm from somebody you were so close to? Maybe you have already experienced something like this. Maybe you've had that blow that came not from without, but from somebody who was inside the closest circle, inside the house, we might even say. Have you experienced this kind of wounding from the person you would least expect it from? I think that this might be one of Jesus' most human experiences. Because even though he knew, he had called it out, he knew Peter was going to betray him, and yet he had to have hoped. He had to have, deep within himself, hoped and longed for Peter to make a different choice. The people closest to us can cause us the most harm. This is true because love is real. Love creates a closeness, and closeness creates vulnerability. And vulnerability is what makes harm possible. This is true in every single meaningful relationship. And we see this play out not just in the pages of the Bible, we see this play out in our ordinary lives. Think of a close friend, a best friend maybe. Someone who promises to show up during a hard season, but then doesn't. They don't mean to hurt you, life gets in the way, things can get busy. And the silence doesn't mean to be cruel. It's not the intention behind it. But the pain is still there. And the pain isn't from what the person did or didn't do. It comes from who they are to you. If a stranger disappears in your time of greatest need, it doesn't sting quite the same way. Or maybe you have a spouse or a partner who speaks carelessly to you in the middle of an argument, and their words sting. They hit home. And even if this person comes to you and apologizes later and tries to make restoration for it, the hurt has happened. And it's happened because this is the person who knows you so well. They know all of your soft spots, all of your weak spots, and that's how they knew what to say to cause and inflict the most damage. Love gave them access. And honestly, we see this in the relationships between parents and children. The disappointment that you might feel from a parent is so much deeper than disappointment that you might feel from someone else. And in the other direction, when a child rejects their parents, that breaks a heart like nothing else possibly could. It's a question of proximity, of closeness, and the vulnerability that comes from that connection. We promise loyalty, don't we? When we enter into a relationship, we promise loyalty and we intend to be faithful. But then pressure comes in, and maybe we have a fear of conflict. Maybe we have a desire for approval. Maybe we're just exhausted. Maybe we want to protect ourselves. And so we do and lean in to all of those things. We distance ourselves from people who need us. And we're not necessarily like Peter. We don't swing a sword or shout denial, but we might stay silent. We might look away or choose comfort over courage. And it's not until later, sometimes much later, that we realize what the cost of staying quiet and comfortable actually was. Wounds like this do not happen because love is absent. They happen because love is central. If love were shallow, the pain would be shallow too. Jesus knew this. Jesus knew this. But he didn't try to protect himself. He didn't just gather around himself admirers and yes people and those who would be, kind of safely removed from his actual personhood. He didn't just want followers, he wanted friends. He calls his disciples not his followers, but his friends. And in doing this, in choosing to have that closeness, to have that proximity, he made himself vulnerable. And he took on the risk that loving someone always has. The risk that you might be misunderstood or betrayed or abandoned. Let me tell you a little bit more of Peter's story. Peter was hiding, stewing in his guilt and shame. Days earlier, Peter had sworn he would never abandon Jesus. Days earlier, he had failed. Now the cross was empty, the tomb was open, and Jesus was alive. But Peter carried the weight of the courtyard. He carried the weight of his betrayal. Resurrection joy had reached the others, but for Peter, it came a little more slowly. So Peter did what he knew how to do when his heart was too heavy for words. He went fishing. Before dawn, the boat rocked gently on the Sea of Galilee. The water was dark and quiet, and the nets came up empty again and again. Peter worked through the night with the others, muscles aching, mind drifting. He wondered what Jesus' forgiveness might look like. He wondered if he was still worthy to follow. As morning broke, a figure stood on the shore. "Friends," the man called out, "have you caught anything?" "No," they answered. "Throw your net on the right side of the boat," he said, "and you'll find some." They obeyed, and suddenly the net strained under the weight of the fish. In that instant, recognition flashed through Peter's heart, and he did not wait. He threw himself into the water and swam towards the shore, because when love is certain, distance becomes unbearable. On the beach, Jesus had prepared breakfast. A small fire crackled. Bread and fish waited. It was an ordinary scene and a holy one. No lectures, no accusations, just an invitation to eat. After breakfast, Jesus turned toward Peter. The others fell quiet. "Simon, son of John," Jesus said gently, using the name Peter had before everything changed? Do you love me more than these? Peter swallowed hard. He remembered the night he had claimed to love Jesus more than anyone else. He remembered how that confidence had collapsed. This time, there was no boasting in his voice. Yes, Lord, Peter said. You know that I love you. Feed my lambs, Jesus replied. And then twice more, Jesus asked Peter the same question. Do you love me? Do you love me? At this questioning, Peter felt that wound within him open up fully. 3 questions for 3 denials. The pain was sharp, but it was also clean. Jesus was not reopening the past to shame him. He was reopening it to heal him. And so Peter's voice trembled as he answered, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus looked at him, this time not across a courtyard, but across a shared meal, not in sorrow, but in trust, summed up by his one simple request. Feed my sheep. On the other side of misunderstanding, betrayal, and abandonment, Jesus did something incredible. He chose to love Peter anyway. Jesus did not ask Peter to explain himself. He didn't demand promises. He didn't offer punishments. He didn't look at Peter and say, do better next time. Instead, he entrusted Peter with care, with love, and with trust and responsibility. Their friendship wasn't erased by Peter's failure. It was restored through grace, forgiveness, and love. The same closeness that allows for harm is the same closeness that allows for healing to be possible. Distant relationships can be discarded, but close relationships can be restored. Jesus didn't replace Peter, and he could have. There were other people there. But Jesus didn't replace Peter. He went out looking for him. He came back to the beach. He didn't shame him publicly in front of all of the other fishermen and disciples. He invited him back gently, not asking for explanations of his behavior. Instead, Jesus asked for love. Do you love me? This is a question that only makes sense between 2 people who already share something deep. I think it's important for us to notice that the gospel, the Bible itself, does not deny that love hurts. It tells the truth about it. It shows us that love, real love, might hurt us sometimes, but that real love also chooses forgiveness over withdrawal. Real love will choose restoration over replacement. And it'll choose vulnerability over self-protection. The people closest to us can cause us the most harm. But that is not evidence that love is a weakness. It's evidence that love is real. The look that Jesus gave Peter across that courtyard after he had been betrayed, it wasn't the look of someone who was surprised. It wasn't somebody who wasn't expecting this betrayal. Jesus already knew that it would happen, right? He had expected it. It was the look of someone who had opened their heart anyway. Jesus knew that he would be hurt. but he chose to love anyway. So what does this mean for us? How does this apply to our regular lives? How can we, like Jesus, try to set aside our own ego or pride or our need to be right so that we can choose to love anyway? I have a couple of reflection questions that are going to be up on the screen. And so I'm going to give us 2 minutes of time to reflect on them. And so they go like this. I want you to think of a friendship where you might be Peter, where you maybe have hurt someone that you care about. And I want you to gently reflect on this question. Is there someone that I have distanced myself from out of fear or comfort or self-protection? And maybe nobody comes to mind for you on that side of the equation, but maybe if we move over to the other side, there might be a relationship that you want to think through. Is there a friendship where you have been misunderstood or betrayed or abandoned? And if this is you, then I want you to ask yourself, what does loving like Jesus look like in this situation? Is Jesus inviting you to soften, to forgive, to stay present, or to simply stop running from your friend? I'll give you a couple minutes, and we'll be back with another question. Finally, I want to ask you to choose one concrete, low-risk act of love towards the person who has hurt you or disappointed you. And I'm only talking about situations in which it's safe and appropriate to do so. Okay? If it's not safe or appropriate, you can skip this part. But maybe there is an act of kindness that you can extend. Some ideas are sending a kind message instead of staying silent. Maybe you could choose not to rehearse or rehash the offense in your mind. As it starts to play through again, say to yourself, no, I'm not going to do that. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to speak respectfully instead of defensively. Or maybe your act of kindness towards this friend could be to pray for them once a day, every day this week. When we look at what Jesus set aside in this story with this friend, it's so important to remember that he did it so that he could love Peter and by extension love us anyway. Love anyway. Love anyway. It's not a grand gesture, to be totally honest with you. It's not a grand gesture. Instead, it's a daily decision. It's a daily decision to resist withdrawing from a relationship that's a little difficult. It's a daily decision to reject a never mind, it's not important kind of mindset. When we agree to love anyway, what we're agreeing to is meeting Jesus in the mess. It means that we aren't going to pretend that we aren't hurt. We're going to be honest about how we have been affected. But then we're going to choose relationship over retreat. We're going to choose grace over scorekeeping. And we're going to choose courage instead of self-protection. Love anyway is a phrase that means that we get to have a fuller life. It means that we get to have more freedom in Jesus Christ. Love anyway is a way for us to follow in Jesus' footsteps. Because Jesus knew that he would be hurt. By Peter, of course. But he also knew that he would be hurt by us. That we would do things that make him misunderstood or betrayed, or that we might abandon him. But he chose to love us anyway. And so this, my friends, this invitation to love anyway is the one that Jesus has set before us.